So thanks for coming. My talk is a little bit more sciencey. Kevin and Stu will be coming after me to show their transformation and their journey. So hopefully these stack upon each other and you guys can come out with some ideas and things that you can take onto your own operation. So we're from Understanding Ag. We say we work for common ground for common good. It was started by Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, and a couple others about 5 years ago. And we're comprised of actual farmers, ranchers. We now consult in over 41 countries, and that number is up to 35 million plus acres. So that's where we're coming from. And I currently live in the UK. I live in Suffolk with my wife, and Stu is in Northumberland, and we're starting to educate and consult here in the UK. I come from Indiana. That state shaded in the red, and on the right is a video on YouTube. We don't know how it got there, but it's in the late 90s, and that's my dad harvesting potatoes. So we grew commodity grains and potatoes and sweet corn and different vegetables. So that's my family on the bottom left. So, you know, this regenerative agriculture term is being thrown around a lot, and I just wanted to get an idea of the audience. What comes to mind when you guys hear the term regenerative agriculture? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it, you know, hippies and fairies and wearing linen and looking at the full moon? What do you guys think? Soil health, good. Anyone else? Sorry? Okay, repairing damage. Sustainable, good.
A more negative question, some people would say it's a challenge to the current way of things. The fear associated with that.
Rocking the apple cart a little bit, yep. Low inputs, yep. And so, yeah, the second question is, what are we trying to regenerate? You said soil health, so the soil, yeah. Ecosystems as a whole. What about communities? Greg talked about keeping the money inside the rural community, not shipping it off to the cities and the manufacturers. Good. So what I wanted to do and what I wanted to first talk about is I'm a soil scientist. I did research in soil microbial ecology. So just a little bit about the soil to understand more of this wonderful resource that we're all managing. So what is soil? My favorite definition is from a book by David Montgomery. He says, soil is curious stuff, part mineral and part organic, a weathered blanket of rotten rock and dead things. And I don't know why, but when I was in university, that idea of soil being rotten rock and dead things just set me off on this journey, thinking sand, silts, and clay are just some form of degraded rock. It was amazing to me. And so the last part of that statement is, so if we average out a soil to about 3 feet deep, that means soil is 0.000014% of the thickness of the planet. Our whole existence as a human society relies on 0.000014%. And so if you shrink that down in ratio, that's like a sheet of paper on top of 2 1/3 Eiffel Towers. That's how thin and crucial this layer is that we're working with in human society. So, you know, a lot of people, they think a heavy soil, it is clay, and they think it's a little counterintuitive, but the clay particles are actually the smallest of the soil particles. So when you look at it in this ratio, it really does a good job to show just how that heaviness comes forth because of how small they are and how tightly they pack together. So if you look at the far right, you can see what a clay particle looks like. It looks like a sheet of paper. So stacked on top of each other, they're like books. But soil isn't just sand, silt, and clay. As you can see on the left there, it's life, it's biology. Those are bacteria in the soil. So we have organic matter along with that rotten rock. And next to that picture of the clay particles is a decomposing plant cell, and you can see how porous and open it is. So if we have a soil that has so little organic matter, think of that as just rocky material. It's dense. We need to get that organic matter. It's fluffy, it's open, it's spongy to get it open like Neil was talking about with his wonderful pictures this morning. So it's life that makes all the difference. Mars, the moon, they have physics, they have chemistry, but what are they missing? They're missing the carbon-based biology. So a little bit about me in university. I started out wanting to be a medical physician. My dad actually pushed me away from the farm. He said, go get a good job. Farming is nothing but hard work. It's long hours, low pay, nothing but heartache. And so I loved science and I loved the human body. And so I took courses to be a medical physician. And one thing that you take is anatomy and physiology. So one thing they harp on is function follows form. And it's the same exact thing on the farm in the soil. To have a good functioning soil, you have to have good form. And what is that good form that Niels and Greg talked about? It's the aggregate. It's aggregating that soil, right? So it's that chocolate cake, cottage cheese looking soil like you see on the left. So on the right is actually a micro scanning graph of a no-till soil. That's the one on the left. And on the right is a chronically tilled soil. So you can see how little pore space it is on the micro level. So that water and that air can't cycle and move in and out like it's supposed to. So aggregates, they're the engine that drives soil function. If you go to any regenerative agriculture conference or talk, you're probably going to hear aggregate, 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 aggregate. And what that aggregation shows is that there's a good balance in the soil. So we need a balance between aerated areas and some anaerobic areas. There's going to be high pH zones and low pH zones right next to each other, right? There's going to be water, and it's going to be a little drier in other areas. And that's what a good living ecosystem is. It's a heterogeneous environment. So this was taken from a textbook, a soil textbook. This is the oxygen content of an aggregate. So on the outside is around 21%. That's like what the air we're breathing is. But on the inner content, it's anaerobic. It's a 0% environment, and that's big, especially for nitrogen fixation, because nitrogen fixation is an anaerobic process. So the more you can aggregate your soil, you're going to have space in the middle of that aggregate to fix nitrogen and get free nitrogen out of the air and into your soil system. So how do you create those aggregates? So moving from right to left, right is the smallest particles, so your silts and your clays, and they just kind of naturally clump together. There's going to be dead microbial carcasses that are a little sticky. They stick together. But what we really want to do is combine those microaggregates into macroaggregates. So combining 100 to 1,000 of the microaggregates together, and that requires the roots and the fungal hyphae to physically bring them in, and a macroaggregate ends up looking like a mesh around all of those aggregates. So here you can see is another scanning graph of those fungal hyphae surrounding the aggregate and creating that mesh so air and water can move in and out as needed. It's really a beautiful system. And those fungal hyphae are alive. They're excreting, they're absorbing things. So this video was taken in California, and it shows they're tube-like. That's how you should think of these fungi. And they can pump compounds and elements, and these are actually nuclei, so genetic material, they can combine with other fungi, pump them to different parts of their bodies and different species, and that's how you start to get fungal genetic diversity and fungal community strength over time. So they're actually really, really smart and fascinating creatures. So part of their importance is not only to physically hold those aggregates together, but chemically hold them together. So they excrete these biotic glues. They're glycoproteins, so they get protein and carbon, combine it together, and that creates a sticky glue that sticks these aggregates together. So another important point is they're hydrophobic. So when it rains and it gets wet, it doesn't disintegrate. It holds its shape. So this was an experiment. So we had lower organic matter soil on the left, higher organic matter soil on the right. Does anybody notice, do you see any visual differences between the two just right off the bat? No? And that's kind of a trick question because it's pretty similar, right? These have been dried down, but look what happens after they get wetted. Look at that low organic matter soil that doesn't have the carbon, it doesn't have the life to hold those aggregates in that soil structure together. It's absolutely imperative that we get carbon and life, especially our fungal hyphae, back in the soils. So if we have good aggregation, we don't have a capped soil, water should move down and get absorbed in those sponges with the mesh around it like it's supposed to be. This was taken in Lincolnshire in England. So on the left is an arable field. And on the right is just 6 meters away outside of the grass margin in the woods next to the field. That's our management. That's the carbon that's been gassed off of that field. We've worked that field literally to death. It's lifeless. And that's not a lone example. 40 to 60% of organic carbon has been estimated to have left our arable soils here in the UK. And it costs us a lot of money. It's not just, conceptual theory, or it's, it makes you feel bad. It's an actual economic damage that we're doing. So what we teach at Understanding Ag is the 6-3-4 framework. The 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and those drive those 4 ecosystem processes. So the way I like to think about it is, the 6 is the what. What are we doing to improve soil health? The 3 rules are the how. How does it happen? How does it improve over time? And the 4 is the why. Why do we do that? Why do we focus on the 4 ecosystem processes? Why do we want to improve them over time? So I like to start off with the why. So the 4 ecosystem processes are the energy cycle, water, mineral or nutrients, and diversity, or the cycle of life. So as Greg so eloquently said, we are in the job of harvesting sunlight and getting something to grow that we can sell to market. And the only way we can do that is with photosynthesis. And, moss is something that photosynthesizes, but it's not efficient. We need plants to be capturing that solar energy, capturing it in the bonds of carbon, growing their bodies, but also sending that carbon and sugar down through the roots to feed those microbial employees in the soil. So every 2 minutes, this is just to show you how much solar energy is reaching the earth and how much we're wasting. Every 2 minutes, the energy reaching the earth from the sun is equivalent to the whole annual energy use of humanity. In 2 minutes, all the energy, the cars, the lighting, air conditioning, everything, in 1 year is equivalent to 2 minutes. So there is a tremendous amount of energy falling on our land that we can use to capture for us and do work for us. But it's all about getting photosynthesis on the land. Obviously, the piece of the ground on the left is not. The piece of ground on the right is. So I was listening to a good podcast on, it's actually nuclear energy, and he said, energy is work, just from a straight physics textbook standpoint. Energy does work. And that work does productivity. And productivity, at the end of the day, is wealth. Productivity is what's going to put money in the bank account. But I just like to add that top line. As farmers and land managers, we need life to capture that energy. So at the end of the day, life on our farm is equal to wealth. The more life we can proliferate on the land, the more value that land has, the more wealthy it is. And there's a really good paper for anybody that wants to dig in deep. It's called the Earth Space Battery. And they detail how Earth is like a battery, right? Compared to the nothingness of space. So Earth can capture that solar energy, have a charge, and discharge it over time. But as you can see on the graph on the right, over the past couple thousand years, we have drastically decreased that battery. So we're draining the battery at a very, very quick rate, especially in the past 150 years. So we need to get back to saving solar energy, building a battery up in our soils, rather than expending it. So we had the energy cycle. The second cycle is the water cycle. So these two are intimately tied. But this is actually a pretty cool graph. So we're all taught the water cycle as kids in elementary school. So we're taught, water comes up and it comes back down. But we're often only taught the large water cycle. So water comes from the ocean or a big body of water and it comes down on the land. But there's also the small water cycle. That's when water comes up off the land and back onto the land. And that's only done by transpiring plants. So we need water to come up and down. So this graph shows the areas that are more cool colors or blue, they get their precipitation mostly from the large water cycle, from large bodies of water. It makes sense, the coastal areas. But areas like China and West Africa, they rely heavily on the small water cycle. And what's one reason why deforestation is so damaging, especially let's think about the Amazon. Those Central South American nations, they get so much of their water that comes originally from the forest. The forest pumps it in from the ocean, spits it back up and back where they can get it. If we cut down all that forest, we're not going to get as much moisture coming onto the land. So this is So growing plants are really what's needed for an effective water cycle. The more green growing plants on this planet, the more effective the water cycle. And we've known this for a really long time. So Ferdinand Columbus, Christopher Columbus's son, over 500 years ago, he said, on July 2nd, 1494, Columbus departed for Jamaica. Every afternoon there was a rain squall that lasted about an hour. The admiral attributes this to the great forests of the land. He knew from experience that formerly this also occurred in the Canary, Madeira, and Azore Islands. But since the removal of the forests that once covered those islands, they do not have so much mist and rain as before. So fewer green growing plants, fewer precipitation. It's not just happenstance how much rain falls in an area. Our management affects that. So, say we have growing plants, let's think about it. Step one, once that rain does come, is to infiltrate. So this little research study just showed that no-tilling and covering the soil are two great practices to improve infiltration rates over time, whereas a continual plowed, disc cultivated, bare soil really capped, and it didn't even allow soil or water in the soil in the first place. So it doesn't matter how much rain you get if you don't let any of it in the soil in the first place. So you got to open that soil up. So this picture on the right was from a research farm that I worked at in Texas. Look at how capped that soil surface is. It's in a semi-arid environment. You'd think that they would open up that soil and capture every precious drop of rain that falls on it, but they didn't. They've managed it in a way for decades that has capped the soil such that I can pick it up like a playing card. That's how rigid it was. So when it's in the soil, can we hold the soil effectively like a sponge? So that's what those macroaggregates are so good at doing. They have that mesh and it allows water in and out, and it has carbon in the middle of that aggregate, and that acts like a sponge. It's like a magnet. It holds on to the positive and negative charges of water. So you can see here in the middle of that macroaggregate, those water droplets are sticking to the soil particles and the organic matter. And you can hold more over time if you have more organic matter. So you can see that 1%, that plant available water is pretty small, but you increase it over time, that's more water your plant can use. So if you have a dry time in the summer, you're going to increase your water drastically. So the third cycle is the nutrient cycle. So every element, every atom on the planet cycles, including carbon, right? So this idea of just vacuuming carbon out of the air and burying it in the ground, carbon is meant to cycle. It's the water that turns the turbine of life. We need it to move and keep moving efficiently, right? So that's the same with oxygen and phosphorus and nitrogen, everything. It all cycles in a healthy system. And the cool thing about it is, as whether you're livestock or an arable farmer, 97 roughly % of the atoms in your plants you're growing comes from the water and the air. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. 97%. The rest originally comes from the mineral material in the rock, and it needs to weather out or be brought out by living organisms. So our carbon comes from the carbon dioxide, which is only about 0.04% of the atmosphere and the air we're breathing. The oxygen and the hydrogen come from water. And the nitrogen, we're swimming in nitrogen. There's 78% nitrogen in the air. There's, 79 million kilos of nitrogen of every hectare of land. So the best way to fertilize your land with nitrogen, aerate the soil. Get the air in there because the air we're in is rich in it. We're swimming in it. And so this was a total nutrient digestion test. It tests for every single nutrient in the soil, of plant available or otherwise. And the interesting thing about this was taken at 14 feet depth. So my colleagues in Canada, this is the nutrients, pounds per acre, at 14 feet depth. We have so many nutrients in our soil, it's just a matter of making them plant available through increasing the biological activity in that soil. And this is a close-up of a grain of sand, and those are actually tunnels that fungal hyphae have excreted acid, taken the minerals that make up that rock into their bodies, make it part of their bodies, or shuttle it to the plant. That's what they do really well. So this is how you get those minerals unlocked. It's with life, things that can literally mine nutrients out of rock. And then once you have the bacteria and the fungi, the baseline creatures functioning well, you have the initial predators. You have the protozoa and the nematodes that feed on them, and then just like any other big animal, they excrete waste. And when that happens around the root happily laps up those nutrients that, might be a phosphorus atom that was once in a grain of sand, now it's in the plant because it was plant available because of life. And now we're finding out that plants are actually able to ingest, they farm and ingest microbes themselves, which is absolutely fascinating. So they'll take up these bacteria and fungi in their roots, strip off their nutrients, say thank you very much, and then send them out the root hair. And it's actually fascinating because there's a theory that says the reason why root hairs develop is more so from this process rather than plants seeking out nutrients. It's because they have these microbes that they need to excrete. They excrete a certain compound called ethylene, and when that builds up, the root hairs extend. So it's a fascinating take that the more life we have, the more those root hairs are going to branch, and the surface area for getting nutrients is going to expand. And lastly, we have the cycle of life, or diversity. So does anybody know what this picture is, what these two pictures are, or where it is? Sorry? I don't think. So this is actually the newest piece of land on the earth. This volcano erupted south of Iceland, and this is called Surtsey Island. So I believe that happened in 1957. And then the picture on the right was taken less than 50 years later, and you can already see how much green growing plant activity. So this is just to show that the cycle of life and what we call succession happens on every landscape, even if it starts out on bare rock, which all of this did start out as bare rock. So you have your pioneer species like your lichens, your mosses, your fungi. They, like I said, excrete those acids, get those minerals out, start to create the soil, create the condition for your smaller annual plants, and then your perennials and grasses. And then if it happens to be precipitation patterns and topography to make your forest, then the climax community will want to be a forest, or it'll want to be a tall grass prairie. It just depends on where you're at. But the point is that everywhere along that path, there are species and living organisms that they're designed to function in that space. And it just so happens that a lot of our pests, pathogens, and weeds are those initial pioneering species. So what does that tell me? And what should that tell us? It tells us that our management is creating early successional landscapes whereby pests, pathogens, and weed, their competitive advantage, what they're supposed to do, thrives in that environment. It's our management that's creating that environment. Because everything, all living creatures have the same goal. It's to get carbon, other nutrients, and energy. No matter what, that's it. It's pretty simple. From bacteria to fungi to us. We all need carbon and energy. It's just our strategy of doing so differs. So our management, what the goal is for our management is to create an environment where we get what we want to grow and grow well and have everything work in harmony rather than have one species, a pioneering species, take over, which is what happens all too often. So why do we want harmony? Why do we want balance? Why can't we just kill the pest? Well, it's because, for example, in insects, for every pest, there's 400 to 1,700 beneficials. So when we indiscriminately try and kill out that pest, we're killing out all of the beneficials. And guess what that does? It creates an early succession landscape whereby that pest can now thrive. So we've just taken out its competitors. We've made life easier for it. So over time, we circle down and down and down, which is what we see in agriculture. So if we try and spray out the aphids, we spray out their natural enemies, and over time, we're going to have huge aphid infestations. And Lundgren, entomologist in the US, his new research, over 5 years now, they found that actually pests were 10 times more abundant in insecticide-treated maize fields, rather than regeneratively managed insecticide-free fields. That's so counterintuitive. How could that be possible? It's because of this diversity and this cycle of life. We're killing out everything, and those pests, their job is to restart the cycle. So that's what we're doing. Same with weeds, and then we get herbicide-resistant weeds, and then we're just in a whole world of hurt. Whether it's insecticide, weed, pathogen, all of these resistance problems are drastically increasing. And in the U.S., we're really reeling from losing our chemistry. It's pretty scary, actually. So when I was in graduate research, I studied in the top left, that T, trichoderma fungi. They are absolutely amazing predators of other fungal pathogens in the soil. So the saying goes, they eat fusarium and phytophthora for lunch. So we need to promote those bacteria, promote the life, so they can control those pathogens without us even having to lift a finger and spray any kind of chemical. So those were the 4 ecosystem processes. The more we can get those to function, the less we need to irrigate, the less we need to bring on external nutrients, the less we need to buy ancient sunlight, which is diesel fuel, to run our tractors. We can run on modern day energy and solar fuel. So those are the 4 ecosystem that's the why. Why do we do what we do? To improve those and ultimately improve profitability. So the 6 principles of soil health are the what. So the first is knowing your context. This is the most important soil health principle and regenerative principle, in my opinion and our opinion, because if you don't understand yourself, your context, what you're working with, who you're working with, the land you're working with, the precipitation nature, you're already setting yourself up at a major disadvantage. So it's not just rainfall, temperature, it's also financial. Are you a landowner? Do you rent? What's your spiritual context? Why do you get up and do what you do in the morning? Why are you guys here? Who are you working for? Who do you want to pass this land on to? Those are serious things to consider when deciding different management practices. So the second principle is minimizing these disturbances, both mechanical, so tillage, as you can see, creating that plow pan, like Greg said, we've developed machinery. It's all cool, it's heavy, it runs well, but it's just pushing that plow pan deeper and deeper and deeper. And so we're doing what I like to call farming in a flower pot. You're really limiting the amount of soil you're able to work with versus opening up those biopores with no-till, that image on the right. You're expanding your farm without paying for any extra land. But chemical disturbances are also to be avoided. And, we think manure is great. It is, but too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And so when we flood a natural system with too much manure or, heaven forbid, anaerobic slurry, bad things are going to happen in terms of soil structure, aggregation, and biology. You can disturb the land too much by grazing too short, too often, as has been said today. You can graze the roots off, like Greg said, and we definitely don't want that. That reduces resilience in the system over time. So look at these tall grass, native grass roots from the middle of North America. Just look at how deep those roots will get if we let them. It's absolutely fantastic. And think about the resilience in the dry summertime, all the moisture they can access, all the carbon they're pumping deeper into the soil, building aggregations. It's absolutely amazing when you wash it out like that. So the third principle is maintaining soil armor. One reason why we want to do that is to protect and create a blanket so we don't have wild temperature fluctuations. Just like us, life in the soil likes to have a constant temperature. So you think about a desert, right? At nighttime, the temperatures drop way low, and then during the day, they skyrocket. That makes it really hard for biology to survive, thrive, and do their job. Whereas if we can create that blanket of plant material, we can create a more temperate swing in the soil so our microbes can function more properly. And we also want to armor the soil from the raindrop. You just feel a raindrop, it's soft, it's pleasant, it's lovely, but actually on a bare soil, it's very destructive. It caps the soil, so that picture on the right was also from my time in Texas. You can see after a rainstorm on bare soil, it just creates these divots. It's like little bombs going off. And at the end of the day, it's actually the main cause of soil erosion, as you'll see. Detaches up high, ends up depositing down low. That's the main cause of soil erosion. We need to keep the soil armored. So this, again, was from my time in Texas just 3 years ago. We had a giant dust bowl in the 30s. We haven't learned a darn thing. This was at a windstorm, just leaving work Look at all that topsoil leaving, the fertility, the life in the soil. It's going, it's blowing, it's gone. So as Ray Archuleta says, bare soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. Whenever you see bare soil, have this phrase run through your mind. The fourth principle is diversity. So, spoiler alert, diversity is in the 6, the 3, and the 4. That's how important diversity is to this whole process of regeneration. We need life, we need abundant life, and we need a diversity of life. Every living organism does a different thing, and there is no such thing as waste in nature. There's only, it's a closed loop, right? So if we miss any chain in that link, it breaks, and it doesn't work as efficiently. So if we have a diverse group of plants and functional diversity, we're going to have greater plant biomass, specifically in a pasture setting. And I just like showing this image. So we used to say, nature is competitive. It's red in the tooth and claw. It's dog eat dog. But what we're learning now is nature is way more collaborative than it is competitive. And so these are images of the mycorrhizal fungi working with the plant roots. I mean, look how intimate it is on that left image. It's in there. It's in the plant cell. And fun fact, why they call it arbuscular is because it looks like a little tree, like a little arbor, as you can see in the top right. So that's how it got its name. It literally infects the plant cell. Plant gives it sugar in exchange for minerals and water that the fungus gets from the soil environment. And it can greatly extend that surface area. And not only that, when you have diversity of plant species, say you have a nitrogen fixer connected to a non-nitrogen fixer, those mycorrhizal fungi can be little shuttle tubes shuttling nitrogen into the grass, let's say, if it calls for nitrogen, and then the grass can send the legume phosphorus. And it's a wonderfully beautiful, complex system, but we need that diversity to let it happen. The fifth principle is maintaining those living roots as many days as is possible in your context. So we can photosynthesize and pump that liquid sun, that liquid solar energy into the soil to feed that rhizosphere area around the root. That's the most diverse, complex environment on the planet. More than the rainforest, it's the centimeter halo around the root because of this process right here. They'll work for us, but we have to feed them, and that happens through the living roots. Not only do they exude these chemicals, but just by sloughing off cells, they produce a mucus as they go through the soil, roots do, and microbes feed on all of these, and that's only with a living plant root. The sixth principle is animal integration. So you guys do a great job here in the UK and Ireland of integrating animals onto the land. Where I'm from, like Greg was saying, it's the land of corn and soy. Where I'm from specifically, you won't find an animal for miles and miles and miles. We've divorced the land. My granddad says in the 60s and 70s, the government incentivized them. They said, put the animals over here, grow the plants here, feed the animals with the plants grown here. And as Wendell Berry said, we took the solution and we turned it into two problems. And that's what we did. And it's time to put the animals back onto the land because every single piece of land on this planet developed with animal integration. We want to mimic that process. So we could use something like these chicken houses that Joel Salatin uses. But not only that, we need to think about our six-legged, eight-legged animals in the soil. So, those protozoa I talked about, they're our primary nutrient cyclers. By eating the bacteria, we have mites and spiders and things that shred that organic matter so it makes the decomposition process faster, or the earthworms. So this little study on the left, they took out all of those creatures, and on the right, they left them in, and this is 15 weeks worth. Look how fast that plant residue is decomposed when they're there versus when they're not there. We need all of the animals on our land, not just the big four-legged ones that we love to see and work with. And then our dung beetles, obviously, taking those nutrients, that organic matter, into the soil before a lot of that can volatilize. So the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship are kind of that, the how it works. So in nature, every practice everything you do to the land, it reverberates out like a rock thrown on the pond. It's either positive or negative. Einstein said compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. And I think it's the same thing with this rule of compounding in terms of land management. If you don't understand it, you're going to constantly negatively compound those effects over time. The second rule is disruptions. So we want to work out the land. So first I said minimize disturbances. That's like an unhealthy boxing match you get into and you're unhealthy and you get beat up and you're in the hospital. Whereas a disruption is more like a workout. It's a healthy workout. So there's a spectrum of human working out, right? You can be a couch potato, you can have a good regimen, go to the gym, or you can overexert yourself. And it's the same exact thing with the land. So we can have oxidized plants that have no animal integration. They die, they're taking space up where photosynthesis could be happening. You have overexerted land. We've seen that over and over again. But here are some disruptions. Hopefully we can pass these slides out to you guys so you can see disruptions that you can implement on your own operation. And then last, like I said, is diversity. So it's in the 6, the 3, and the 4. So we need to think about implementing all of these together. It's not, I'm going to pick and choose this one like a cafeteria. They all work together, and they work exponentially. So if you do 2 together, it doesn't equal 2, it equals 5. If you do 3 of them together, it equals 25. That's how it works in nature. It's exponential when you work it all together. So that's been a lot. I'm the science nerd of the group, so that's not everybody's cup of tea. But the big takeaway is these are biological and ecological systems we're working with. Yes, there is physics. Soil physics is important. Yes, there is chemistry. Chemistry is very important. Biochemistry, organic chemistry. But by and large, we've ignored the fact that they're biological and ecological systems. So we need to feed and house, most importantly, the soil microbes, but those earthworms, those arthropods, all the way up to the animals and the plants that we're going to sell to market. And the big question whenever you make any management decision should be, in my opinion, how is this going to affect the 4 ecosystem processes? Is it going to improve them? Are they going to become more efficient over time, or is it going to become less efficient and I'm going to have to bring in more external fuel and water and nutrients to just get the same amount of product over time? So I believe I have a couple others, but that's probably about time. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll take
Hi everyone, Stuart Johnson here. I am a farmer from Northumberland. I'm going to start off by thanking Kyle for doing all the legwork. All I have to do is talk about what I actually do at my farm, which makes my life a lot easier. Kyle does all of the hard work with his stuff there, so I do feel sorry for Kyle having to cover all the scientific stuff, but he's a nerd and he loves it, so I'm happy to let him do it. Thanks very much to Fields Good for having us here. It's really good of you, apart from the horrendous title you gave to my talk. I'm not sure where that came from, so hopefully no one's thinking that I would come up with that. But so I'm a farmer from Northumberland, first and foremost. We are family-run tenant farmers from Northumberland in the Tyne Valley. We are 500 and something acres at home on an AHA tenancy, a bit of an FBT farm, 280 acres, and then the rest of it's annual let land. We are a livestock-based business. We grow some arable for our home use, but first and foremost, what we all enjoy doing is livestock. I enjoy the cows. Luckily, the rest of the team enjoys the sheep, so I don't have to go too far into that very often. Yeah, livestock's our passion. Arable is there to back up the livestock industry, the livestock enterprises, sorry. We use grants as and when we can, as most farmers do. I know some farmers are out there saying, shouldn't be taking grants, that sort of thing. I think in the current way the system is and all that sort of stuff, we'll take what we can get for now, with the basis being that we're going to build a business that's financially solvent without all those grants in the future. But for now, we will keep taking those. Varying soil types, sandy, loam, clay. The main recurring theme at our farm is stones. We have stones everywhere. I know you do in Ireland as well, so I'm not going to Northern Ireland, sorry. So I'm not going to focus on that too much. But that is one of the main things we have. Bugbears, picking stones after ploughing and stuff years ago. We don't have any secondary income streams. We are purely purely farmers who are farming, production farmers. We're not trying to deviate off and pretend that we're making our money somewhere else and pretend we're still farming. We are purely farmers. So I work a bit with Understanding Ag now. I've followed them for years and have recently dropped into their little cohort here as Kevin, who we're trying to get to join us as well, who's playing hardball and isn't that keen at the minute, but he has agreed to talk with us today to give us a bit of an experience of the island. How did we farm 2012? We were conventional in line with everyone else. Loads of fertilizer, loads of feed. We went for continental type cows. We were looking for production. We were trying to breed show cattle, much the same as many farms do. Didn't necessarily have a problem with that. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good system at the time. I suppose we actually had a really robust system. There was no reason for us to change apart from the fact we thought we wanted to. We had too many enterprises within enterprises, so we tried to do too many little enterprises rather than focusing our time on the many important things. And I will be the first to acknowledge at that time we did not consider soil health at all in the way we farmed. It was just a medium to grow our grass and our corn. So why did we change? We changed for financially driven. I wanted to be saving costs. It actually started, and I can remember this vividly, with a contractor said to me, why do you bother ploughing? Why don't you just drill straight in? It'll save you some money. So he talked himself out of a job that day, and I stopped getting him to come and plough. So I just started drilling straight in. That was the turning point. Just wanted to make more money. I'm very open about that. That was why we did it. I did want business resilience. I knew we were very heavily exposed to fertilizer prices, spray prices, because that's what we did a lot of. And I wanted a different way. I just got engaged to my wife, current wife now, obviously, and then I assumed at some point that we were having some children. And I mean, there's a couple of memes there in terms of, farmers, we revel in the fact how hard we work. We love it, don't we? But I didn't want to do that when I had some kids coming up, so I wanted to find a different way while I still had time to do that. So for me, it was the financials, the resilience, but this bit here is really the key for me as to why do people do it. There's a multitude of reasons on the screen there. If you want to grow more grass, you want to sequester carbon, you want improved animal welfare. The real kicker for me is, the real bit that makes this whole thing really fantastic is that no matter what your reason is, the truth is that whatever your focused reason is, those other things are all coming with you. So in terms of, are we all doing it for the same reason? No, but we're all going to get to the same result either way. And I think that's brilliant, the fact that we can all win. I'm winning, hopefully financially. The wider world's winning in terms of are we sequestering carbon? Absolutely. Is our water cycle better? Absolutely. And that's the real kicker, is that everyone's going to win off the back of this type of farming. And there's not many things in life that we can say that with, so I'm a big fan of it. You'll have to excuse me rushing here. I'm aware we're under time here, so I am flying through some of these slides here. Whoa, what have I done there? So yeah, 2012, when that man said to us, why do you plough? Stopped ploughing, decided I wouldn't do that. We started thinking a bit more about the soil, a bit more about looking after the soil, how we could get stuff for free out of the soil without using inputs. Very scattergun approach. I thought I was doing some really, really good things at the time. I thought I was making some real headway, some real progress. Looking back, I wasn't making any headway or progress at all. Again, happy to talk about that, not a problem. It was on the farm, I was driving the changes, no one else had really bought in. I hadn't tried to bring the rest of the team with me, I'd kind of just tried to force it upon them, shall we say. And that's maybe not the right way to do this either. So at the time, we were probably one step forward, two steps back throughout the whole process. We did start growing some multi-species cover crops rather than the mono-species cover crops that we were using in the past. But then we were grazing it in such a manner that we were making the right mess like that. That's not actually our farm, but our farm did look like that after we'd finished doing it. So we were not doing things completely correctly, and we were seeing no real sort of movement forwards. Still very much economically focused. I still hadn't quite got my head around the fact that if the soil's healthy, we're going to win on an economic level, whereas I was focused on how can we win on an economic level at all costs. So we had a lot of varying degrees of success. Moved away from the plough-based system, got a clade and drill. used that in my arable. We are about 250 acres arable we used to be. We're down to about 70 now. We've kind of reduced that because we just don't need it anymore. We found that the Claydon was quite a nice stepping stone into it, but it didn't quite go the full hog, so we have moved on from that again since then. What I was doing was using more foliar feeds rather than fertilizers, rather than, your NPKs, and taught myself to compost tea brew, which is the brew in the corner there, the picture of. Thought I was the bee's knees for doing that as well. Thought I was doing a really fantastic job. Again, in hindsight now, because I didn't change my system, no matter how much biology I'm putting on there, it's just going to keep reverting back to the system that I was before. And that's something I think as farmers we need to get our head around, that yes, let's use these products, let's use these things that are going to fix this, but let's change our system that's going to allow us to not have to keep using those things. Otherwise, we're just replacing one input with another. So why is this relevant? I had replaced one input with another, and I don't know if I was necessarily saving as much cost as I could have done because I was just focused on leaf sampling, doing loads of testing, then putting things on the arable. I did initially just start on the arable. No one else likes driving tractors at mine, so I took on that and focused all of it on the arable side of things. Still used a lot of conventional inputs, still heavily fertilizing, still using not the full spray regime, but pretty good dose, if I'm honest with you. And I was still imposing my decisions on the environment rather than taking a step back and trying to see what the environment could manage. I was then trying to still instill what I wanted to do on the environment. We had a terrible 2017, livestock predominantly, the sheep were relentless. We had a terrible calving. I think we sort of went from 100, we had 100 cows, say, and we had 5 cesareans and lost 12 to 15 calves, I think it was. I forget the exact numbers, but it was not a good calving. And it was at this point that I thought, are we going to do this properly, or are we just going to go back to the conventional methods? So about 2017-18, started the whole educating myself properly. Like I said before, it was all scattergun. I'd just gone out there and decided to try different things, and there was no real methodology behind it. Didn't really have a way of monitoring if I was doing it right or not. And like I said before, in hindsight, probably a lot of it was very, very wrong. So started educating myself more, watching as much as I could, reading as much as I could, trying to put a bit more of a structured process into what I was trying to do. Quite lucky around this time that I found Gabe Brown and Alan Williams, Understanding Ag. They obviously set up since then, but I spent a lot of time watching their videos, trying to understand what they were doing. And I guess the 634 that Kyle's just talked about was an absolute godsend for me, because I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination like Kyle is. I'm not someone who can process that information readily and then make decisions quickly off the back of it. It takes me quite a bit longer to dissect that and think about it. But what I do love about is the 634 is a principle-led system that we maybe don't have to understand all that science all the time. As long as we're following this 634, we will be moving in an upward trajectory and we will be making progress. And for that, for me, was an absolute godsend. I learned around this time that livestock could be managed too, because up to that point I was still following a very set stock system. So bringing that livestock management into it was absolutely crucial to the progress we've made to this point. Started thinking about the farm as a bit of a whole. Again, as farmers, we like to think about as individual sections, individual enterprises, and how things are. You can make a decision here and it's not going to affect over here. Well, that's not right, because everything is impacting on everything else somewhere else on the farm. So to take that whole approach was very important. I really veer away from using the word holistic, because I do know it's quite off-putting for a lot of people, but essentially that's what we are trying to do. And I started to work on the positive mental attitude a bit more, because I did beat myself up quite a bit about stuff. So I try to find positives. So rather than looking at failure and thinking, well, that was a disaster, I'm just trying to be slightly more positive about it and thinking, well, what have we learned from that? Because at times as farmers, there's enough negative stuff going on without beating ourselves up about it as well. So kind of try to change my thing. I'll do a quick rundown on amp grazing. This is an entire topic. This is like a whole afternoon session usually, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. But just for those of you who haven't heard of it, maybe adaptive multi-paddock grazing. We're attempting to mimic nature and the way livestock would interact with the natural ecological systems. Greg's touched on it. You know, the most productive grasslands in the world, your savannas, your prairies in America, they're based on a huge amount of ruminants running through the land, huge rest periods, and coming back later on when it's had a huge amount of time for the grass to grow. grow back to its sort of fully express itself. Now, as farmers, we haven't done that for years, especially in my set stock system, we never did that. So to move to this system was a big change, but it actually allowed us to let the ground rest, to let those aggregates start to build, and that's really where the key of this whole thing comes in. Alan Williams, who's obviously one of the founders of Understanding Ag, is probably one of the number one adaptive multi-paddock grazers there is. So if you can look up any of his stuff, there's plenty of access to webinars and stuff like that. It's fascinating stuff. What we're trying to do is what you see this picture here. Hopefully you can see the continuous stocking. It's very slow, dormant system. What we're trying to do is jump in there with this adaptive grazing. If we go right to the end, we want to speed that up, that cycling. We want to get that system with a high stock density grazing. We want to fire up that system and get it going, and then we want to get that cyclical system just going round and round and round. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to extract from the land. We just want to keep that system growing. Grow it, graze it, shit it back down, for want of a better word, and let's do that again. And that's the way to create really, really high amounts of grass growth. I'll not dwell too much on the other side of it. What is adaptive multi-paddock grazing? Alan talked about this recently. It's actually easier to say what it's not. It's not continuous grazing. It's not 21-day short rotations. It's not graze 50%, leave 50% every time. It's not graze a third, trample a third, leave a third every time. It's not total grazing. I'm sure some of you have heard of total grazing, and it's certainly not rewilding. What it is, it's fluid, it's adaptive, it's changeable. There's no set formula. What we're doing is observing, and we're making decisions based on what we need to do and what we've observed. We're trying to allow plants to get as mature as possible, but juggling that livestock performance alongside that. And there's no way we can put down a set formula for that. And I think that's what some people struggle with at times, is they want a set formula written out what we're doing. We don't do that. We just make it up as we go along, in terms of we have a rough plan of how we're going to do it, but we like to know that we can deviate from that, we can move from that, and if something doesn't quite grow back the way we think it will, we'll adjust the system and move with it. And that's what the whole thing is in farming. It makes farming so much fun again, because we're not just sitting there following the prescribed plan. We're actually observing, we're working with the land, and we're making decisions based on what we're seeing. Keys is goal-orientated. We want to make sure that we've got goals set in how we want to do things. It's all about, and again, it's been mentioned numerous times today, so I'll not dwell on it. We're talking about stock density here, not stocking rate. It doesn't matter how many head of livestock we're carrying. We're talking about how many pounds per acre we're carrying, or how many kilos per hectare. That's the key to this, is how tight can we get that stock and density, and how much can we impact the land and move on and let it rest. Again, management flexibility key. We want to make sure that we're just adapting and changing with it. Frequent moves, frequent rests, and make sure that we get that root recovery, because that is the absolute key to this whole thing. Is we want root recovery to get to what Kyle talked about just before, those macro aggregates, or the mighty aggregate as Kyle calls them, the mighty aggregate that's going to save us, in so many different ways, as Kyle's already touched on there. As again we've talked about, it's highly reliant on temporary fencing, and going back to Kyle's bit again before about the compounding, cascading effects. Let's make decisions based on what's happened, and let's try and make positive compounding decisions. So if we've made a poor grazing, let's give it an extra bit of rest before we go back there. Let's try and stack positive compounding effects on top of one another, and let's really see this system thrive. So with this, I've mentioned it a few times, observations is absolutely key. We're using all our senses, all 5 senses as we go. We can't ignore any of them. We need to make time to observe. You're going to say you're moving electric fences, so you haven't got time to move, you haven't got time to observe. I've actually argued we've got more time to spend with the cattle, because I'm not traveling the whole farm every day to see them. I'm going to 1 or 2 points where I know the livestock are. So I'm spending more time with those livestock, but probably no more time in general than I was driving around the whole farm when we were set stocked. We're looking at observations, and we're going to make actions based on what we're seeing. Indicated species are absolutely key. That's a dung beetle off our farm. We've got the geotrupis. Some people are obsessed with dung beetles. They're fantastic. They're brilliant. They're doing a wonderful job. Am I naturally drawn to dung beetles? Probably not, no. But they're a great indicator species that's telling me, if we've got the dung beetle, we've got a functioning ecosystem. We've got those big guys working for us that are burrowing down. They can go down to a meter. So when we talk about lazy farming or lazy tillage, that's exactly what we want, is dung beetles, earthworms, the whole lot working for us and moving all those, and cycling those nutrients. Worms, obviously key indicator species. Pollinators, we want those back. We've got to make room for those. People always talk about the mosaic approach in terms of let's make room for pollinators. I'm a big fan of that, but I'm also a big fan of, look, we can get as much, if not more, biodiversity in a really well-established, mature grassland. So in terms of, are we making space for these pollinators or for the biodiversity? Yes, we are, but also we're tying that together with our grassland now, because our grassland's becoming equally as biodiverse. The bottom right-hand corner that you're looking at, it's bottom of my screen, I'm assuming it's the same for you. Bottom right-hand corner is, looks like some trees. It's actually, there's a kestrel down there in the bottom left-hand corner of that picture. So that's an indicator species to us that we've got kestrels. So in the morning when we move the cows, or in the afternoon if we move the cows, the kestrel comes in, and it comes in to get some mice. So the cows walk in, they kick up the grass. We've got mice in there, obviously dormouse or whatever it is. I don't know enough about it to know which one it is. But we can see the kestrels coming in to get their sort of free breakfast, free lunch. Again, that's just a sign we've got a functioning ecosystem. They can't be there without everything below them and that food web system that allows that to happen. And we need the seeds from the tall grass grazing to make that happen. So what do we do? The real changes we made, the biggest one was mindset. We always worked on a mass production. We need as much out of the system as possible. The biggest change we made was our mindset, that we don't need to extract everything out of the land every year. What we need to do is create a system that's cyclical, and it allows us to withdraw some, but not too much to be debilitating on that system. We created a system for our environment. We sat down and we sort of went through it all, and we made a plan of what should we be doing here in our context, in our environment. What should we be farming here? We had too much arable. We were trying to outperform the land. So we've scaled that back massively since then. We then tried to find livestock to suit our system. So we were fully continental cows, breeding show calves. Like I said before, thoroughly enjoyed it. Are they the right cows that we should be doing in a grassland system where we want to keep them outside all winter? No, they can't survive. They don't like that. Well, they can survive, but they really won't thrive in that system. So we then had to change ours to, as Greg's pointed out in his, and it's been mentioned a few times today, we want a smaller cow, we want more condition, natural condition on that cow, we want it to be able to rear a calf without losing that condition, and we want to make sure that that cow can stay outside as long as I need it to stay outside. So in our system, we want to bring them, it's not right yet, our system, by the way, but we try and bring them in around the end of January, early February, bring them in, calve them, and then back out again. So we're not fully where we want to be yet, but we're going to get there eventually. So we needed to then build the infrastructure to do that. We needed to manage that livestock, amp grazing, as we talked about. So then we need the infrastructure that's going to allow us to amp graze in our system. We ditched the planned, so we used to grow a lot of cover crops. Now, cover crops are, in some systems, very, very important. We were running a sort of a winter barley followed by a spring crop, a cover crop, then into spring crops. But in reality, there's a lot of dead time there where there's not much growing in that grass. Now, we're talking about having living roots in the ground all the time, but actually we haven't got much growing either side of that cover crop coming up and actually getting going. So that system's been dropped out. We now work on a 5 and 2, which is we go 5 years of legume and herbage swards followed by 2 years of arable. So we sort of 5 years, I like to call about 5 years of building up a soil health bank account, and then we cash a bit of that bank account back out again. Never more than we hopefully put in, but we've cashed a bit out, and then we go again. That allows us to grow incredibly cheap arable crops. We have a break-even point on our winter barley, for example, of about 1.1 tonne an acre. So we don't need 4 tonne an acre now. We're happy with 2 tonne an acre, 2.5, 3 tonne at certain points. It's fine because we're straight away into profit. I know a guy across the river from me who works on a break-even point of 3.3 tonnes an acre. It makes my skin crawl that because it just panics the life out of me, thinking that if one thing goes against you, the weather, anything that doesn't let you get onto the land to get that crop, that's an awful lot of money you've tied up to then not be able to get back out of it. So for me, I find it much less stressful working on a really low input, low output, medium output system rather than that high output system we've been focusing on. We went to find our unfair advantages, which turned out to be those stones that I'd been complaining about forever. So Stones in the soil are incredibly good for helping you outwinter stock when you haven't quite earned the right to do that with aggregate building. So at our place, stones everywhere, the bane of my life, picked them for years. All of a sudden, when we wanted to leave cattle outside, not make a mess, not mess the ground up, not pug it, we had these glorious stones in there that were actually carrying the weight of our cattle a lot of the time. Now, again, we've said before, there's a lot of stones in Northern Ireland, a lot of stones in Ireland. Let's find our unfair advantage. Greg talked about it earlier on, unfair advantages. Everyone's got an unfair advantage. It probably looks like a problem most of the time, but actually, if we look into it enough, it's an unfair advantage if we can make it work for us. Again, that goes back to mindset in terms of are we looking for an unfair advantage? Are we looking for a problem? Which one is it? So where have we got to? No bag P&K applied for 7 years. No fungicide, pesticides applied for 5. Nitrogen applications, 89% down. I'll quantify that in terms of we used to use about 70, 90 tons of fertilizer a year. We've used less than 10 for the last 3 years. Only on the arable now. We don't put anything on the grass. We haven't reduced stock numbers. We've just taken out the inputs that will go in with them, which is a really nice place to be in. We haven't ploughed for 12 years, and we have just finished, this will be the 4th year coming up now where we're grazing sheep on grass where it's grown without any supplementary feed throughout the winter. That again is a huge weight off your mind that you're not going to be reliant on nuts and cake and feedstuffs that we have to feed them usually. Extended the cattle grazing season, so we used to bring the cattle in around November, unless we put them out to those strip grazed fields. I was showing you the cover crops, which absolutely butchered them, and we put them on there for a couple of months, and probably by January they'd come in, but we'd have a right mess behind us. So we're now in the 3rd year now of extending that cattle grazing season through to January, without any supplementary feed going out there to them, and without making a mess so that we have to create an expense later on. I'm a, as you can probably tell, a pretty tight farmer. I don't want to spend a lot of money reseeding. I don't want to spend time reseeding. So if I can manage my system, that means I don't have to do that, then that puts me in a much stronger place going forward. I like to think we're more resilient as a business entirely in terms of weather. So 2018, I think someone was talking about this earlier on, the drought of 2018, which in the grand scheme of the world is probably not a drought, but it felt like a drought around here. We burnt off, we had a standing crop of winter barley ready to go ahead. It just keeled over and died, and we had great chunks of the field doing that, and that was a bit of an eye-opener, having spent from 2012 to 2018 thinking I was improving the land. Probably hadn't built up any resilience in that time whatsoever. So to be able to, it was a 1 in 100 year drought, they called it in the UK and Ireland. They said it would, we'll not see that again in our lifetime. 4 years later, 2022, it came back and it was even worse. Just in that period, in the aggregate building, bigger rotations, bigger rest periods, we had nothing stand up and die that year, and I would say at our place we were arguably drier that year than we were in 2018. So that felt like a little win after a lot of not winning for quite a few years. That felt like we'd actually achieved something, and that was good. So we're definitely more resilient to the weather, definitely more resilient to the extremes in prices. For me, the complaints of a few years ago of the fertilizer prices up to £1,000 a tonne, it didn't matter because I wasn't buying any. I still had loads left in the shed from years before, so I just sat on it, and probably should have sold it, but didn't. Just sat on it, and life was a lot less stressful. I'm not saying we're winning all the time. We definitely don't, but it's a nicer place to be when you're not relying on someone else to produce something for you or to deliver something for you or to give you a price for. If you can just manage that in-house, it makes life a lot easier. So if we can reduce our exposure to all these things that's uncontrollables, I call them, we can't control the price of the fertilizer, we can't control the price of the sprays, but if we can reduce our exposure to that, that makes our life a lot easier and it makes our life a lot less stressful. So yeah, we've generally reduced nearly all variable costs without sacrificing yield, which is good. So we're in a much stronger place than we were. And I've put these bit at the bottom about the return of the biodiversity. I talked about this at the start. That's not why I did it, but it's one of the reasons, or it's one of the added bonuses that I've seen. Now, I'm chuffed to bits at the back. I mean, it's lovely seeing them around the place. Would I do it for them without the financial gain that came with it? I probably wouldn't at the start, but I think now I realise that you can't have one without the other. The whole thing's sort of joined together. So to see them, the indicator species, these species coming back, is a real sign of progress in our place. And we're still production farmers. We still have the same amount of stock. We've still got a lot less arable now, which was actually costing us the money, but we've developed a system. It doesn't mean that we don't have to feed that stock as much as we did. Are we there yet? Not even close. We're miles away. Mistakes still made. Still got flawed system. We carve at the wrong time of year. We still know that. It goes back a little bit to the team that I was talking about before. I'm one of four at home, and I would go straight to the end. And it's not right for everyone. No one else is comfortable to go that far yet. So I don't want to lose them on this journey. So I'm going to go slow in baby steps and get there eventually. So the plan is to, eventually we want to be outwinded full time. We want to be calving down in April onwards rather than this sort of late February. We want to grow no arable. We want to go to full perennial systems throughout the year. That's the plan. But like I say, not the whole team's comfortable yet. So there's no point in, if you're doing this as a unit, as a family unit especially, you need to make sure we're all going at this together and make sure we're all doing it at our own pace. The mindset changed the most. We still have guilty pleasures, so we still breed heifers, sell them with calves at foot. The least regenerative thing you can probably imagine. We still do that. Guilty pleasure, we like doing it. My dad loves it, so it's one of those, if he's happy, let him do it, and I'll just keep going with the other stuff, and then we'll eventually phase that out at some point as well, but we haven't got there yet. Mindset change, I've talked about it quite a few times. That's the key to this whole thing, is that you've got to get your head around the fact that it's not farming as we know it, but it's still certainly farming, and we need to make sure that we understand that. I'll leave it with the last bit. I think it's the last one. Cannot underestimate the importance of embracing actual systemic change. Now, Kyle touched on that in terms of the 634. Is the 634 that we talk about and understand in ag, which is so important, are we doing a 1, 2, 3, or are we doing a 3, 4, 2? The exponential growth with making a full systemic change and embracing it all will be far better than picking out certain points and thinking we'll just do a few little things. Now, we don't need to know the science of this. We just need to follow these principles, these rules. Anyone can do it. You don't need someone to tell you how to do it, but anyone can do it. And we need to be able to just follow them and work on the fact that we are going to see some successes if we can stick to it as much as possible and make our decisions based on what we're seeing and what we're observing on the ground. I'm going to wrap that up because Kevin's got to come next. So.
My presentation isn't near as fancy as the last two. My name is Kevin O'Hanlon. I'm from South Carlow, and I manage an organic and regenerative dairy farm in Wexford. We're 5 years doing adaptive regenerative grazing wrong, is the way it'll start. We've made loads of mistakes, but you try to learn from them, and you try to see what works and what's not working. But we had Gabe Brown over in the beginning of August, in July, beginning of August. So the centre one here is the high density grazing, where they go in and they put a lot of dung in a small area to increase your biology. You try to increase your biology in that area. So they're only in there for like half an hour. So it's like 500 pounds of, or 500,000 pounds of beef, effectively, weight onto that acre. So as you can see, they walk it in quite well, and then they're moved on out to the rest of the paddock for the rest of their grazing. The other one then is just a video from last year of them going into a higher sward as well. We're seeing no drop in milk. We're organic, so we don't get paid on fats and proteins the way we produce our milk, the way the milk is sold. But we have seen the litres rise when we go into the higher density swards, and there's a dung beetle just after the cow is literally leaving the paddock. The cows are we stock them fairly high most of the time. We're on a kind of 2 grazings per paddock, so they have 40 days going around the farm. It seems to be the sweet spot over the winter time. Then we're about 100 days going around the farm, in around a 100-day rotation. We got 350 days grazing in 2022. We were 350 days at grass with the dairy yard. Last year it was cut short, I think it was 326. We were cut short last year because it just got so wet in the back end. So the cows, when they go out for the day grazings, they have access to the house, so they can come back in to the house at all times, so that they don't damage land. Instead of lying down in the field, they'll come down and lie down in the cubicles. So at times we had zero grazing grass as well. That was a mistake this year. As regards, I made a mistake on the grazing platform. I sowed whole crop and we let off a lot of it for silage. So it ended up that we actually tightened up the cows quite a lot. The grazing platform most of the time is running about 3.2 to 3.3 livestock units per hectare, the grazing part. So it's at times, if we have to bring in feed, we'll bring in feed, but I'd rather bring in fresh grass than be opening the silage bales. So that was, this year we had to do it because I'd effectively knocked 30% of the grazing platform, purely my own fault, but you try to learn from your mistakes. So it made grazing very difficult this year to get to higher covers, to go into higher covers, to let them build, because we were short, because we'd taken out that much land earlier in the season. So it's just, we hopefully learn from mistakes. So these are the dry cows. This is one of the outblocks. So it's a 27-acre bog. You can see in the top left there. This is the type of grass in the bottom left. But yeah, when you let the cows in, majority of the cows go for rushes. They go eating rushes. They're dry cows, these, so they're actually start calving the day before yesterday. But a lot of them will go foraging the rushes before they ever touch the grass, which I never thought I'd see, that cows would eat rushes before they touch grass. But as you can see, all the heads are up, the grass ain't that high, the rushes are. But yeah, so it's just, you try and train them to do that. So when they went into that bog first, we would have had high density strips. They would have walked in, they would have walked a lot of grass in, so then they start picking at the rushes. And then we moved them on again, did the same thing again, to start picking at the rushes. Now when we're moving now, they go for the rushes first before they go for grass. So there must be something in the rushes that we don't know. Yeah, so this is being grazed at the moment. There was never a fence put up in this in its existence, I'd imagine. It was always just open the gate and the cows went down to it for maybe a month, 5 weeks. And they were just allowed through the whole 27 acres. Water is quite difficult down there. If you look in the top left, the centre column of trees, that's a drain. So we can give them access to that to a degree. But the drain is about 8-9 foot under the field. So it's quite hard to get them into. You have to pick your spots where you go into it. So these are the heifers, sorry. These are the heifers. So this is last year. This was a reseed of a multi-species sward, a herbal lay. All these ladies are now in the milking parlour. So this was let off for about 55 days, I think that paddock on the left was. After we reseeded, after we got the first grazing off, so it was grazed to taking it up after reseeding. And then it was let off about 55 days. They went down across the grand. We probably overgrazed that a bit. We're trying to get the grass to tiller and things. I'd say we overgrazed it a bit, but as I said, we're 5 years making mistakes, so that's part of it. This one then is, this was only taken last week, I think. This is the heifers in the bog. This year's in calf heifers. So they're allocated 0.12 of an acre a day, 0.12, and they're going into, I thought that video was way longer than that. They're going into 0.12. We actually have the bog broke up into paddocks now into 1.2 acre paddocks, or acre paddocks, sorry. So they're going down across that and they get their allocation. We're moving the water truck then with them. We just have the yellow hosing, the flexible garden hose, because it's a lot easier to move around than the black hosing. We had the black hosing at points and then you just run off the yellow hosing. So it's just much easier. These are just the calves, this year's spring's calves. So we feed a bit of barley for between 14 and 24 days, that's it. They don't get any meal after that, the calves. They're in good nick, there's not a bother on them. So the meal is only to get, for the rumen to develop, to get the starch into them, to get the rumen to develop. There's a few Angus calves there as well, they're being reared on cows, high cell-count cows. So next then we have, this is the pig pens, this is my own place. Sorry, we'll do the sheep first. So the sheep here are gone into forage rye that was sowed in. So there are, what do you call them? Growth, is it growth inhibitors? That's sprayed upon it. I never sprayed in my life, but that stuff anyway. They bring down the sward, they bring down the cover. Because we didn't graze the year before and it grew to nearly 7 foot high, the forage rye. So it was a bit of excess. So we let the sheep in, graze it down to naught, and that still went over 5 foot, that forage rye. The sheep then, there's no meal fed to, it's a lot like Stuart, there's no meal fed to lambs. They're all finished off multi-species in general. The whole lot, whoops, sorry. Where am I going? They're all finished off multi-species of lambs, and we've no issue finishing without meal. The sheep, yours don't get meal or anything either. So the pigs then, we built pig pens in the bog picture there a while ago. On the right-hand side of that, there's a row of trees there's the trees up the centre, and then there's a row of trees on the right-hand side. So we built our pig pens there, and they go up along that, and they don't get fed meal either. We feed them, they're just grass and the foraging through the trees. We sell most of them directly. We sell a lot of them then as weaners and stuff like that as well. But people that buy them know we're not going to have mud-fat pigs or anything. They're buying them off us because they're not fed meal. They're kept outside in pens. They can go walk down and see the pens if they want to. Go down and see the pigs, there's no issue. That's my presentation, short and sweet.